From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's today's lineup. K-State's Gregg Ibendahl awaits to talk about his new analysis of fuel price trends and the seasonal tendencies of gas and diesel prices of importance to you farmers and ranchers. He'll offer his fuel price outlook for the rest of 2022. Then, over from the Farm Service Agency State Office, Josh Ritter will go over another facet of the USDA's Direct Farm Ownership Loan Program, this called the Down Payment Program. It serves to partially finance the purchase of a family farm by an eligible farmer. And on this week's edition of Milk Lines, K-State's Mike Brouk will talk about planning for pre-fresh management of those transition dairy cows. All that here on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today on the K-State Radio Network. Good to have you along with us, as always. Of broad interest, of course, among agricultural producers and many other folks as well, the escalating costs of fuel that we've seen in the last several months now, and how that's going to play out on the farm or ranch looking forward. Our guest now has just put out an analysis of that on the agmanager.info website. He's Gregg Ibendahl, farm management economist with K-State Research and Extension. And you've slapped some numbers together and made some comparisons here from historical trends that we'll get into, Gregg. But before we do, just to recap where we've been and where we're at with gas and diesel prices, very pertinent to farmers and ranchers. 2 years ago, very manageable, a little bit different currently.
Yeah, I think most people probably have noticed fuel prices probably have been creeping up slowly over the last year or so. So pretty much, we kind of had a really low point kind of in mid-2020 when, thanks to COVID, people weren't doing anything. So fuel dropped off to a pretty low price. But since then, it's been pretty steadily rising. And over the course of 2021, it pretty much has increased the entire year. So, we're now at levels, it's certainly not a record yet, but we're at levels really people haven't seen probably since 2014. So it's probably a little bit of sticker shock, whenever a gasoline price starts to tick above $3 and you start to pay that several times in a row, you start to think about more and more than you have in the past.
A $1 per gallon rise in fuel costs grabs the attention, that's for sure. You have taken numbers from the past and you have looked at what's called the seasonality of fuel prices as they might pertain to agricultural operations. Talk about that, if you would.
Well, so what I do is look at like the last 5 or 6 years and then look at the various months to see what month during the year, when you look at kind of the average of the last 5 years, what months stick out as far as maybe being a high or low time to buy fuel prices. And you can really see seasonality the most if you look at gasoline prices. So typically with gasoline, very seasonal demand, you see producers travel a lot more during the summertime and with people taking vacations and such. So typically gas prices will be higher, almost guaranteed, in the summer than they are in the other times of the year. We'll typically see our lowest gasoline price in the wintertime. And that trend still holds. So, COVID has kind of messed some things up as far as, demand and such from when it was really bad in 2020 when people weren't doing anything. So that's something that's always existed. COVID kind of screwed that around a little bit, but it still shows up when we look at the current analysis. We still see a summer trend for gasoline, although this latest analysis I did kind of backed it up a little bit, so it's a little bit later than what it has been. Now, on the diesel side, we also see some seasonality, and that has changed a lot for diesel fuel. At one point, diesel fuel was a close substitute for heating oil, so we would typically see diesel prices highest in the wintertime. Well, that changed probably at least a decade or probably 2 decades ago now, so that we see more of a seasonal demand for diesel fuel actually in the spring and in the fall, which is really for farmers is kind of be a bad thing. So those point in times for a producer where you're trying to put a crop in or get a crop out, we would typically see the highest diesel prices. That's not quite the case now. I don't know, again, because that's a COVID effect or not, but now we're still seeing that fall trend for diesel for in the fall where prices were probably 15 to 20 cents higher like in October and November, but the rest of the year it's probably just a little bit below average.
But you're saying once again that traditional spring price peak that producers are accustomed to may not be so, at least for the moment.
Yeah, again, I don't know if that's a COVID thing or maybe there is something different going on. Diesel fuel it doesn't show the strong seasonality of what gasoline does, but it's still there. So, like I said, normally we would see a higher price in maybe March, April, May for diesel fuel. This last 5 years doesn't really show that. Although we do see a lot of variability in diesel prices, especially when we look at like January and February. There's a lot of variability in prices there. The variability tends to go down quite a bit when we get to the summertime. So just looking at my current analysis, probably the best time to buy diesel would probably be during the summertime.
To know further what's coming, though, it's important to understand the correlation between the oil prices that are quoted daily on the market and how that translates to, in tangible terms, gasoline and diesel prices.
Yeah, if you look at the analysis, I go back and in my paper I have weekly data for the gas price and oil price, and you draw a correlation between those. A very, very strong correlation between the oil price and then what the price is for diesel and gas, probably above 90%. And that makes perfect sense to everybody. I mean, we obviously get our diesel and gas from a barrel of oil, so the fact when the oil price goes up, you see a corresponding rise in the diesel and gas price shouldn't really shock anybody. So we can kind of look ahead to see what the futures market is for our oil and then kind of translate that back to what would happen in the gas and diesel markets that way.
So you cite in your paper if a $10 increase in the price of oil occurs, that will translate into a pretty good solid number as far as understanding how it affects gasoline and diesel.
Yeah, I think it's about a 20-some cent rise for gasoline, about a 30-some cent rise for $10 in oil price for diesel fuel. So a $10 increase in the price of oil seems like it affects the diesel price just a little bit more than the gas price. In that time frame that I use for this, I have quite a range of oil prices during that. So we do have pretty good numbers for how those relationships play out here. So again, there is a futures market for oil prices, and we can get some guidance for what's going to happen there. And based on current correlations, that should be a pretty good guide for what we can expect for fuel prices going forward.
All along here, you're leaning on information, failed to mention this earlier, Gregg, from the Energy Information Agency, which provide the numbers here. And that agency, the EIA, is forecasting oil prices saying what right now as we look at the rest of 2022?
Well, I was a little bit surprised. They're actually showing a little bit of a decline over the next couple of years. So they're saying we maybe have peaked out for oil prices, and they're looking kind of at a slow, steady decline over the next 2 years, which really would be a good thing. I think they're actually predicting for 2022 that oil prices would be about $75 per barrel, which would actually translate into a gas and diesel price probably a little bit lower than what we're currently paying now.
How does that then factor into one's purchasing strategy as a farmer or rancher? If, in fact, there's a chance that we see prices coming down in the months ahead?
Well, I think that's probably a good thing for producers. Now, again, EIA is kind of making their best guess too, and it wouldn't, it would just take one shock of something happening in the world, like I don't know if we end up going to war with Russia or something like that happening, that would probably throw everything out the window. But assuming that the EIA forecast is somewhat accurate, I think producers can expect probably prices to slowly decline during the year. I would probably, if I just had to take my best guess, which is really what I'm doing, I would have to say probably summer was probably going to be the low point for diesel fuel, and then you also have to start considering the seasonality of things too here. So I would expect probably diesel prices to decline slowly throughout now probably through the middle of the summer or maybe into early fall. And then with the seasonality effect, probably see maybe a 10 or 15 cent rise come fall then.
Is it worth it then for producers to think more in terms of bulk purchases on a larger scale or ride with the market?
Well, again, there's so much variability with the diesel prices in the spring. That's kind of a hard thing to say here. I would almost probably tend to let it ride maybe. Again, there's less variability in the summertime, so maybe that might be a good time to stock up if you're looking to purchase fuel in advance for fall harvest. Probably come August might be a good time to consider doing that.
Want to mention one more thing associated with this, and it's a hot-button topic, of course, fertilizer prices. There is a correlation with that in the oil market, and there is a spillover effect there.
Well, the modeling I've done looking at fertilizer prices would say so, because I have a fertilizer model that looks like at the price of corn plus the price of oil in a combination model to look at how those two things affect fertilizer prices. So Again, I'm working on a kind of analysis of that right now, but the fact that oil prices maybe are going to start to go down, to me that would be a good thing for the fertilizer market. I think we might possibly see prices for fertilizer go down this coming year. But again, this whole rise in fertilizer prices at the end of 2021 kind of broke my model for that, so I don't want to make any guarantees for that. But I think there is a good chance you're going to see fertilizer prices declining. Now, again, we have situations like a fertilizer plant being on fire in North Carolina that may complicate that too. But that is something I'm going to be working on here in the next few weeks.
We don't want to jump the gun on that because your analysis is not complete, but be looking for that on agmanager.info quite soon. Right now, you can find the article that Gregg has put together on the fuel price outlook for 2022, considering gas and diesel and how that might figure into you agricultural producers' plans for managing that input cost for your operations. Agmanager.info is where you'll find that. Good contribution as always, Gregg. Thanks for going over this with us.
All right, thank you.
Gregg Ibendahl, farm management economist with K-State Research and Extension. And just as an aside here, fuel costs are, of course, but one of many components of a farming or ranching budget. And Gregg was among the team of agricultural economists here at K-State who just updated the university's crop and livestock production budgets for 2022, now at you producers' disposal. And the budget tools they've created for you to work with cover, for instance, the expected costs for diesel, using the crops side as an example, for fertilizer applications, for harvesting, for hauling harvested grain, planting, and spraying any operation employing diesel. We bring this up just to encourage you to take full advantage of those production budget tools as you map out your production plan here for 22. Those are found again at agmanager.info under the Farm Budgets tab at the top of the page. And we'll return with more for you after this break. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now on Agriculture Today, and every other week we get together with personnel from the Farm Service Agency, state headquarters for Kansas, to see what's up on the USDA farm program front. Along with us now is Josh Ritter. He's the farm loan chief with the FSA here in the state of Kansas. And Josh, welcome back. Previously, when we talked, you visited about the Farm Service Agency's Direct Farm Ownership Loan Program, and you'd like to share more about that program today under the umbrella of that Direct Farm Ownership opportunity.
Hi, Eric. Yeah, that's right. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about our down payment program and give some more details on that program as well. Mm-hmm. FSA's down payment program loan funds can be used to partially finance the purchase of a family farm by an eligible beginning farmer or socially disadvantaged farmer. And under this program, the applicant will provide a 5% cash down payment. FSA will provide up to 45% of the financing, and a commercial lender will finance the remaining portion of that purchase.
Now, again, this is targeted toward applicants that are considered either a beginning farmer or a socially disadvantaged farmer. Please explain how those determinations are made, how those folks are identified in such ways.
Sure, yeah. Under our regulations, a beginning farmer is an individual or entity who has not operated a farm for more than 10 years, substantially participates in the farm operation. For farm ownership loans, they cannot own a farm greater than 30% of the average size in the county at the time of the application. And if the applicant is an entity, all members must be related by blood or marriage, and all entity members must be eligible beginning farmers. So that's the beginning farmer portion. Also under this program, it's also targeted to socially disadvantaged farmers. So under our FSA regulations, we define a socially disadvantaged farmer as an individual or entity who is a member of a socially disadvantaged group. And for FSA and our regulations, these groups consist of American Indians or Alaskan Natives, Asians, African Americans, Native Hawaiians or other Pacific Islanders, Hispanics, and also women.
Again, those are the folks who are, in fact, singled out for eligibility for this program. But you mentioned the down payment requirement here, and that's the centerpiece of what we'll talk about today. If you would, Josh, go into more depth on that, as well as the loan amounts that are available under the program.
Sure. And under this down payment program, the applicant must provide a minimum down payment of 5% of the purchase price of the farm, and that minimum down payment must be provided in cash. Regarding the loan amounts available, FSA's maximum loan amount under this program will not exceed 45% of the lesser of the purchase price or the appraised value of the farm to be acquired, or $667,000. That means under no circumstance will FSA's loan under a down payment program purchase be more than $300,150. The other limitation to keep in mind is FSA's financing combined with the lender participating in the purchase cannot exceed 95% of that total purchase price.
So those are the ground rules, if you will, for qualifying for one of these loans. But anybody taking out any kind of loan would be highly interested in the rates and terms available under the down payment program here. What would those be?
Sure, and that's a good point. The interest rate for the down payment program loans is the regular direct farm ownership rate minus 4%, but in no case will it be less than 1.5%. So currently the interest rate is 1.5% since our direct farm ownership regular interest rate is under 5.5%. So to make it as simple as possible, is right now the interest rate for this down payment program is 1.5%. And FSA's loan repayment term under this program cannot exceed 20 years. So the repayment period can be less than that 20 years if requested by the applicant, but in most cases, what you're looking at a 20-year repayment under this program. On the commercial lending portion of things, the lender is free to set their own interest rate for their portion of the financing. However, there are some restrictions on the repayment terms for the commercial loan. The financing provided by the participating lender must have an amortization period of at least 30 years and cannot have a balloon payment due within the first 20 years of the loan. The idea behind limiting the ability to have a balloon payment within that first 20 years is that it allows the applicant to pay off FSA's portion of the financing prior to any balloon payments hitting.
There has to be some level of security that goes with qualifying for one of these down payment program loans, does there not?
Yeah, under this program, FSA's loan will be secured by a lien on the property being purchased with the loan funds, and that lien will be junior to the lender financing the balance of the purchase. So that means FSA will file a second mortgage on the property being purchased behind the participating lender's first mortgage. The advantage to participating in the down payment program is that FSA is not required to take a lien on any additional security. So as long as FSA's loan is 100% secured by the property being purchased, we will not take a lien or mortgage on any other assets owned by the applicant.
Well, we've quickly walked through the particulars of the program itself, but producers will have their own individual questions on their qualifications and what this program might do for them in the way of financing. One of the best places to go would be the FSA office locally, would it not?
Yeah, I'd recommend producers start with their local FSA office. We have 20 sites in Kansas that service FSA farm loan programs. So if your local office does not administer the program, they should be able to get you to the contact information for the FLP site that you'll need to work through. Currently, I would also highly encourage our applicants or interested producers to contact that office either through phone or email to set up an appointment. As right now, all of our offices are still operating under a limited staffing model and can only take visitors by appointment or maybe not even at all, depending on what category that office is in. So I just want people to make sure they don't waste a trip into town.
That's right. Be sure to continue to check with your local FSA folks as to how business is being handled yet. And if you'd like to know more about the Farm Ownership Loan Program, that's the Direct Ownership Loan Program, and within that, the down payment program option that Josh has just outlined, those people can answer those questions for you directly. Do have a conversation with them. Josh, thank you, as always.
Thanks, Eric. Have a great day.
You as well. He's the Farm Loan Chief, Farm Service Agency, State Office for Kansas. That's Josh Ritter. Well, just a little more FSA-oriented information taking us up to the break. This year's USDA Agricultural Outlook Forum will shine a spotlight on some issues that haven't gotten a lot of attention in the past. That forum is set for later this month, and with more on this, the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
For USDA Chief Economist Seth Meyer, the annual Agricultural Outlook Forum incorporates the old and the new. First, the forum's commodity outlooks are like familiar friends.
My background is always in the outlook ones. I love them because I lived that day to day when I worked over at the World Board, so I love them.
At the same time, the fact that the forum will be virtual this year gives him a chance to dip into panels on topics he is less familiar with.
There's one here that I think is really fascinating on heirs property, for instance. Not something I deal with every day, but, get in there and understand the issue, who it affects, and how USDA engages in this.
So speaking of heirs property, what is the issue? If you want to know more, the forum has a panel on that topic.
Heirs property is a term that is used when a landowner passes away without having a will in place or any type of deed or written documentation showing that the landowner actually owned the land. And what happens is those heirs that are left living, they inherit the land, they inherit the issues, but there is no proof of ownership.
That was the Farm Service Agency's Director of Outreach, Latrice Hill.
Farm Service Agency offers so many different emergency programs, but if there's no proof of ownership, it's going to be extremely difficult for anyone in the family to receive funding for the land.
She adds that heirs property issues impact agricultural producers around the country.
Who are these heirs property landowners? This isn't something that is just specific to African Americans. We also have white landowners along the Appalachias, the Hispanic landowners down near the Colonias. We also have Asian Americans in Hawaii who have these issues, as well as our Native American landowners.
Meanwhile, another session will focus on rural mental health, which is a first for the USDA forum.
It's a huge problem and it's very challenging because I would say the bulk of the rural mental health issues go unheard.
That was Farm Service Agency Administrator Zach Deschanel.
I think generally speaking, there is such a stigma attached to someone seeking mental health assistance, and that is probably more pervasive in the farming and ranching industry in rural America because there's this can-do attitude, this individual inclination towards self-sufficiency.
So what can USDA do to help?
I personally feel that the role of the federal government in this space should be to deal with those stressors. Providing an economic safety net for producers is of the utmost importance to help mitigate the stress that comes with uncertainty in markets, uncertainty in weather, uncertainty in production.
USDA's annual Agricultural Outlook Forum will be held virtually on February 24th and 25th. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And with that mention just a second ago about farm stress, a quick program note here. On tomorrow's broadcast, we'll be getting into stress management on the farm or ranch. Some helpful information on that. K-State's Tawny Larson of the Agribility Program will be on board as one of our guests. So be listening for that tomorrow here. You are tuned to Agriculture Today.
Next up on Agriculture Today is this week's edition of Milk Lines from K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk. Mike?
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers about planning ahead for your transition in fresh cows. Many of us are probably very excited. We've been through the fall breeding season. We're starting to see those preg checks come back, and those animals that we'd come through the summertime in 2021 without getting pregnant, we've probably gotten many of those pregnant. Means they're going to be calving in the future. So as you start thinking about this, you need to start thinking about where you're sitting as far as space in your transition pen as well as space in the fresh pen as well. So typically what happens is when we see this slug of animals that we get pregnant in the fall, that results in transition crowding in the future. So now is the time to plan for that. So here's what I'd encourage you to do. I'd encourage you to take a look at your animals that you got pregnant in the months of September, October, and November, maybe even into early December. Then think about the fact that they're going to calve 9 months later. So that puts us in May, June, July, and some of those animals may be in August. So as you think about this is a time when we have heat stress here in Kansas. And if we don't carefully account for how many animals we're going to be calving during that time, we probably have some additional stress in terms of overcrowding. So as you look at your transition or pre-fresh pen, here's some things to consider. If you're on bedded pack, you need about 100 square foot per cow. If you're in a dry lot situation, you need about 600 square feet per cow. And if you have shade out there, at least 80 square feet per cow. Bunk space needs to be at about 30 inches per animal, or if you're using headlocks, you need to be at about 120% of what you expect to be in there, or you need to have no more than 80% of those locks filled by animals in the pen. So how does this figure out? Let's assume that you're planning on calving 40 animals in a 4-week period during this heavy calving time. So basically what you need to do is you need to take a look at how many animals you're going to be calving during 4-week periods for the months of May, June, July, and August. Whatever the top month or 4-week period will be, you need to add 20% to that. So if that number was 40 animals in a single 4-week period and 20% above that, that'd mean you need space for 48 animals. So if we're looking at bedded pack, that means about 4,800 square feet needed, or a 40 by 12 bedded pack area. This is in addition to the feeding space and other exercise space in the pen, just essentially the lane area that you'd have. If you look into the amount of space we need at the feed bunk, if you have 48 animals times 30 inches, that would be about 120 foot of bunk space. Again, if you're running headlocks, you'd need at least 58 headlocks in that space as well to accommodate these animals if they're the standard 24-inch headlocks. So if you're out in a dry lot situation, you need to consider how much square footage you would need for those animals as well. Likely in a dry lot situation, you're going to have more than 40 animals that you're going to be calving in any 4-week period. So doing those calculations ahead is really important. So once you do the calculations, how much space do you actually have in this area? If you don't have enough space, what are you going to do when you hit May, June, July, and August? You still need to account for this. Just simply continuing to overcrowd these areas and suffering the issues that we have with lack of performance of early lactation animals because of this is probably not an acceptable thing. I want you to think about this. Likely we're moving into a time when we're going to have better milk prices in 2022 than we did in 2021. So spending a little bit of money now to get ready for a calving slug that you may be facing in May, June, July, and August is really important. There may be additional cash flow there to help you cover some of those costs. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to be thinking ahead about what calving is going to look like in the months of May, June, July, and August.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to you for joining us. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Shelby Varner for Agriculture Today, and this is the K-State Radio Network.